Okay. Good evening. Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of making this presentation tonight. I'm Didier, and I work for Handicap International as a technical advisor on emergency and rehabilitation project. And I'm here to talk a little bit about rehabilitation and amputation from a rehabilitation point of view, which means that amputation goes much further than just cutting a limb. We all aware, I believe, that cutting a limb means difficulties, that the person that lost a limb will have difficulties that that person didn't have before. Cutting a limb usually means losing the ability of walking, and that's going to bring a problem the person didn't have before. We're also aware that these difficulties will be influenced by the context, access, for example, to a prosthetic device or not. If there's no access to such devices, the difficulties will be even worse. But that's usually where we stop when we think about amputation. What we do is what I did when I took this picture. We focus on the stump. When it comes to rehabilitation, what we do then is what this picture shows. We start focusing also on the person that's behind the stump. I took that picture in Yushu in China after 2010 earthquake. I first took the first picture, then I realized that's not what amputation is about. There's a child behind, and I don't know how come he smiled when I focused on him. It was not smiling when I focused on the stump, and that's what rehabilitation is about: is to try and grasp the whole picture of amputation. So what I want to really explain today is that amputation goes further than just cutting the limb. To better understand what that means, I'll start with this very nice definition of disability that we have, that was provided by the WHO. Very broad definition that says that disability is an umbrella term for impairment, activity limitation, and participation restriction. Disability is the interaction between individual with health conditions, so for example amputation, and personal and environmental factors such as negative attitudes, inaccessibility of transportation or public buildings, and limited social support. Nice definition, but I prefer this drawing that shows a little bit better what disability is about. When I show this drawing, I usually explain that disability means a lack of access to opportunities that are considered normal in a certain context for a certain person. So for example, that child over there, normal opportunities for him would be to go to school, to enjoy some activities. For an adult, it would be to have access to a job, participate to social event, get married, have access to health facilities. Those are normal opportunities. If for one or another reason a person doesn't have access to those opportunities, we say that the person is disabled. And here we see three main factors that might prevent a person to have access to those opportunities. First, the physical problem, so in this case, paralysis of the lower limbs, it could be an amputation. Then we have the physical barriers, inaccessibility, so we would have the stairs, we would have the bad roads, we would have a lot of obstacles in the environment that would make it more difficult to access those opportunities. For example, all the stairs in the school that would make it difficult for the child to access the school. Third type of barriers is attitude from the society, from the community, that would tend to isolate people with disabilities. So no entry, you are not welcome, we don't know you, we are scared of you, we don't want to include you in our society. So that's a drawing that shows what the definition is about. So once we understand what disability is, we can easily understand what rehabilitation is about. Rehabilitation is about preventing disability, or at least decreasing the level of disability a person faces. So we saw there are three types of obstacles. So we're going to address those three types of obstacles during rehabilitation through physical rehabilitation and equipment, accessibility, and attitude change. The problem is that if we do only one of those, we still don't reach accessibility or participation or inclusion in the society. We can provide rehabilitation equipment, but if we don't do accessibility, the child still doesn't reach the house. We can do accessibility, but without a wheelchair, still doesn't reach all the opportunities, and same for the attitude change. So the best is to try and do integrated solution where we address all the three problems. This does apply to amputated, to people with amputation. They would face the same problem. They will, if they don't have a prosthesis, they would have difficulties to walk. Even with a prosthesis, all the stairs still remain a problem, and attitude of the community also might be a problem, even though with amputation it's usually less, especially after disaster. In Haiti, for example, we saw that before the disaster, disabled persons were discriminated, and they were much less after the disaster because they were seen as survivors and kind of heroes. But it still applies for people with amputation. This is a short movie that shows physical rehabilitation after an amputation. So it starts with the amputation. But just to show you very quickly what physical rehabilitation is about after an amputation. So it's in Haiti. This was a short movie made by Handicap International in Haiti to show the rehabilitation process from early rehabilitation care. I would have the patient standing, transfer, would work on transfer, so the patient would be able to move around more easily alone, transfer standing up. Some physical exercise like mobilization, strengthening to prepare for fitting the prosthesis. Because we need strong muscle, we cannot have a muscle shortness to put a prosthesis. Bandage that should start early to shape the stump, also important for fitting the prosthesis. Teaching the patient is very important. I don't remember who said that the surgeon is the first physiotherapist. I think the family is also first physiotherapist. They have to learn how to make exercises, and that shows production of prosthesis. In this case, it was in Haiti, so it's a temporary prosthesis. It's not a final prosthesis. Specific technology, it's much easier to make this kind of prosthesis. Requires less equipment, less time. It can be done quite easily, but it has to be, it only lasts for about 3 months, and after we have to replace that with a final prosthesis. So those are the different stages for production of the prosthesis. Assembling the prosthesis. So it comes as kit, so it's very easy to make. And we have kits for below knee and above knee prosthesis. And once the prosthesis is made, we'll start gait training. Make sure that the prosthesis fits well. And then we'll start with weight-bearing exercise. So we have to teach the person to trust the prosthesis and put weight on the prosthesis, so he or she will be able to properly walk. And then we'll teach gait step by step, starting with a single step, and then a whole gait cycle. And then we'll switch to more functional training once they can walk on flat ground. Then we have to put some obstacles, try to do exercise that are similar to what the person will face once they go back home. And this one just shows quickly what a permanent prosthesis looks like. So it's quite different. These are more difficult to do, but they are much better. And we can see that this young lady there works pretty well with her prosthesis. Then returning home, returning to school actually. So there we can see that it's still quite difficult to get access to environment, but she went back to school. So we started right after the surgery and accompanied this young woman until she went back home. This movie doesn't show very much what actually happens once you leave the orthopedic center and when you go home. It was very short, this last part. Doesn't show all the social inclusion activities that have to take part. For example, in the school, probably teacher would have to be sensitized, other student would have to be sensitized so that they would accept that person in the school. Some accessibility work should be done also at home or in the school so that she would access more easily. But I wanted to show and insist more on the physical part of rehabilitation, because that's where the surgical act, the amputation really impacts. So the cutting a limb and the way we cut a limb will impact on how much function the person will recover, and how much function the person will recover will influence how much she will, what level of disability she will face. The better function she will recover, the less disability she will face. And when we look at the impact of surgery on disability and rehab, there are two main factors. First, the quality of amputation. I'm no doctor, so I'm not gonna talk about that. But I've seen amputation, good and bad, and I know that a good amputation makes it much easier to fit a prosthesis. Amputation with complications such as neuroma, exostosis, or infection make it much more difficult for us to work with the patient. Second factor, I would like to say a few words about it, level of amputation. We talked here today about cutting or not cutting. When the decision to cut is taken, there's also factors that need to be taken in terms of level of amputation. There are levels of amputation that are better in terms of functional recovery and rehabilitation. I know that a surgeon has to balance the medical condition, cannot cut wherever he wants, he has to cut where he can. But when that decision is taken, I think it's important to try and remember a few rules. There are no universal rules about level of amputation. I made 5 rules on my own experience and based on some existing protocols. I want to show you those 5 rules. First rule, very general rule about appropriate limb length. General rule for above knee amputation. The best level of amputation is between middle and distal third of the stump. Of the thigh. For below knee amputation, the best would be between the distal and proximal third. That's a very general rule. That's where we prefer the amputation to be done. Second rule, preservation of joint level. If rule 1 applies, we would of course prefer below knee than above knee amputation. Much easier after to walk with a below knee prosthesis than an above knee prosthesis. It's a question of joints, joint control, and weight bearing. Third rule about weight bearing. Again, from a functional point of view, through knee amputation is better than above knee amputation. From a functional point of view, I wanted to ask you, in your protocol, you said you don't want to cut through knee. That's a medical, but from a functional point of view, we prefer because we'll have a better weight bearing. And it's usually much easier to walk with a through knee prosthesis than above knee prosthesis. Rule 4, through knee might be better than BK, even if the limb length cannot be ensured. Meaning that if we have to cut very high in the leg and have a very short stump below the knee, again, from a functional point of view and a fitting point of view, that's not really good. It makes it much more difficult to fit a prosthesis. We'll have to keep the knee in flexion to ensure weight bearing, and that leads to muscle shortness. Also, a short stump makes it much more difficult to control the prosthesis. Increase of energy requirement and tiredness. So it's not. So sometimes it's better to go against this rule 2 if the stump is very short. So those are 4 rules that are quite clear. Unfortunately, there's a 5th rule that says that there are other factors that need to be taken into account. You cannot just base a decision on the 4 rule over there. There are other factors. And I mentioned, for example, the availability of technology. So I said I would prefer a through-knee amputation than an above-knee amputation. But through-knee prostheses are not available everywhere. So might in that case be better to cut through the thigh anyway. Expected functional recovery, so depending on the age of the person, the type of the injury, we could decide also to cut there or there. And then there's cosmetic and patient expectation. So again, the example of a through-knee amputation instead of a above-knee amputation. In terms of function, the through-knee would be better. In terms of cosmetic, it would not be as good because the knee would be lower, and that would be, you would see it when the person sits, the knee would be, the prosthetic knee would be in front, would be lower, and some people just don't like that because when they're sitting, you can see that they're wearing a prosthesis. Elderly person that doesn't walk much but cares about cosmetic might prefer to be cut through the knee, above the knee than through the knee. So those are the few factors that we need to take into account when we decide the level of the amputation. So as a conclusion, amputation usually means disability. In order to decrease as much as possible the level of disability and to improve the surgery outputs, medical services should be accompanied with rehabilitation services. We mentioned that. I think that really came to light after Haiti, the SPHERE standard you may have heard about. The 2011 update now mentioned that any medical care should come with, any surgical care at least should come with rehabilitation care. WHO 2011 World Report on Disability also mentioned that. Input from rehabilitation should start preoperatively if possible. A rehabilitation professional could bring some information regarding those rules and analyzing and see with the surgeon and try to balance between the medical needs and the functional recovery and expectations. And follow-up should be provided until returning home. So those are all the social inclusion activities that I didn't talk much about today, but that are very important. Early rehabilitation is possible even in emergency situation. We did it, we did it in Haiti, but we did it in other places as well, and it's important and it's possible to do it. Just wanted to finish, mention this a consensus statement regarding the multidisciplinary care of amputees, blah, blah, blah. This is a work that was done beginning of this year during a conference organized by Harvard Humanitarian Initiative in Boston. And there was a subgroup working specifically on amputation during disaster. And the idea was to come up with minimal standards for amputation. It was a multidisciplinary group, so surgeon, anesthetist, rehab professional, general doctors, really a broad panel of people. And the final version of this consensus statement is not released yet, but it should be soon. And it's pretty much the same as what we've been doing here today. So I think it's quite interesting. There are things happening, and we should keep going on working on that because it's very important to be better prepared for the next disaster that will occur. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the paper is now open for discussion.